I'm making this video to challenge the belief that being transgender is something that exists only in your mind, that it's all psychological. It is in fact a physiological issue, and the misunderstanding arises primarily from the incorrect assumption that gender is an either-or situation. The idea that the only factor that determines gender is the presence or absence of a Y chromosome is incomplete. The way that the body develops is complex and remarkable. Um, Here I'm only going to briefly touch on some of the basics which are relevant to gender. To start, the communication that goes on between your cells and between your cells and their environment, that communication is done through chemistry. That's the language that your cells use. The presence or absence of chemicals or their relative concentrations to one another, that's all information that your cells take into account when determining how they're going to differentiate. So what cells they're going to turn into, what types of tissues they're going to develop into. Up until week 7, the embryos of XX and XY individuals are the same. They have the ability to develop male or female reproductive systems. And it's important to note that male and female reproductive systems develop out of the same precursor tissues. They just need a signal to tell them which pathway to activate. And the importance of the Y chromosome is that it carries the SRY gene, which is considered the master sex-determining gene. And what this gene does is it activates a pathway leading to testis formation. Once the testis is developed, it begins producing two hormones, AMH and testosterone. AMH suppresses the ovary formation pathway so that they don't produce female hormones. And testosterone, with its derivative DHT, they induce the further development of the male reproductive system. Now, the problem lies in the fact that there are an enormous amount of chemicals in our environment these days. They're ubiquitous. And some of these chemicals, which are called endocrine disrupting chemicals, they can cause issues. I won't get into the different categories that they fall into, but essentially you can have chemicals that are technically not hormones that your body produces, but they mimic estrogen or they mimic androgen hormones, and they can cause a lot of issues. So what does this mean for tissue that's differentiating, that's trying to figure out what it's supposed to become? Well, for one thing, it confuses communication. And their potent effects is those effects are hugely magnified in an embryo because it's so tiny. A very small concentration can do a lot. So you expose a developing embryo to the wrong hormones at the wrong time, and what you're essentially doing is sending out signals to those cells and activating or inhibiting pathways that otherwise would not have been. So far I've only mentioned the impact of hormones. There are other things which impact sex determination, especially at the genetic level. I'm just going to list a couple of different situations which can cause variation in sex determination, and if you'd like to learn about the others, there's a ton of material on both embryology and developmental biology online. And if you have any specific questions, I'll do my best to direct you to the relevant literature. So for now, for individuals that have XX chromosomes, there's a condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And in this case, sorry, my cat is about to climb on the... Okay, all right, so, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So in this situation, the adrenal glands overproduce androgenic hormones, such as testosterone, and this can cause variation in gender. Also, it has been documented that prenatal exposure to male hormones can have effects on developing embryos. So, for example, medications that the mother has taken, and historically, this has been an issue. Um, they've pulled drugs off of the market because of this effect that they can have. Um, so you can also have obviously environmental chemicals that I already touched upon. All of these things can impact cell differentiation and development. And so for individuals, for example, that are XY chromosomes, um, chemical signaling can be influenced by impaired testicle formation. Certain forms of congenital adrenal hyperplasia can also impair the production of male hormones. There's a disorder stemming from a mutation of an enzyme involved in male hormone production called 5A reductase deficiency. So that's another situation. And like I said, there are a lot of genetic disorders that can influence this as well, which I don't have time to really go into those. But for now, I'm going to focus on one specific example because it's the one that I used when I was explaining examples of gender variation to my in-laws. And that is androgen insensitivity syndrome. And this occurs in individuals who are genetically XY. So normally they would become male. Now, let's deconstruct the terminology. So the androgen refers to androgenic hormones such as testosterone, and the insensitivity is referring to the fact that the cells that are supposed to be receiving these hormones are insensitive to them. So even if their bodies are producing sufficient levels of testosterone, those developing tissues don't get the message. And without those instructions, they differentiate to the default, which is female reproductive genitalia, etc. So you get a genetically male child who is born looking every bit female. They are declared to be female on their birth certificate. They are raised female. They grow up as female. And most people who have this condition don't find out about it until they reach puberty and don't menstruate. Or if they're trying to become pregnant later on and they can't. So when people find out about this, it's understandingly quite shocking to them, and reactions certainly vary. Some people choose to undergo gender reassignment, but many of them just get on estrogen since their bodies aren't producing the normal female hormones, and they continue living happily as women. So this is an example of a well-documented medical syndrome whereby gender is absolutely not either or. And as I said, this is just one example. Apparently my dog wants to be in the video as well. Okay, so one more thing about development that I wanted to make sure and explain is that gender determination is not a one-off event. There are multiple stages at which variation can occur. And one of these most important distinctions is between the development of reproductive systems and neurological development. So the fascinating thing is that these two determining stages do not occur simultaneously. So what this means is that if you have abnormal hormone levels at one stage, but not at the other stage, you can get a physiological mismatch. So for example, if an XX individual receives normal female hormone concentrations during genital development, that person will have female reproductive systems and be assigned female at birth. But if that same embryo was exposed to excessive androgenic hormones during its neurological development, then the baby's brain is going to be wired as a male brain. Now, I'm not saying that males and females have these completely differently structured brains. Okay, There is, like everything else, huge variation along the spectrum of all different types of variables. But there are differences in general. And the gender identity um, does exist within the neurological framework. I mean, you're born with an innate sense of who you are. Everyone really can attest to this, especially transgender people. No matter how strongly society and their families push them to be one gender, it cannot change this innate sense of who they are. Even if we're really good at adapting ourselves to fit societal norms, you just can't erase that innate identity wherever it lies along the spectrum, and that's because it's wired neurologically. Um, so that's a really fascinating thing, and there's a lot of new research coming out. There's a lot of research being done, and I'm really very excited to learn more about it as that research is done. But my main hope in explaining some of this is to alleviate shame and stigma. Um, Being transgender is not a mental disorder. It's an endocrine disorder. It's hormones. You were born with a unique body, not a lesser body. And if hormones and surgery can help bring your body more into alignment with how your brain is wired, then that's something that you should pursue. Um, if you're happy with your body and maybe you just want to live a more androgynous lifestyle and not do any of the hormones or surgery, that's okay too. Okay, like I said, it's a spectrum. There are multiple stages where variation can occur. I know that this journey is challenging, and the world doesn't exactly make it easy for us, which is why it's that much more important for us to not make it harder on ourselves by judging ourselves. Um, I have felt the shame, and I have felt the self-hatred and the embarrassment. Um, it holds you down, it holds you back from living a happy and fulfilled life. This journey is a hard one. We do it because the destination is worth it. Don't make it harder on yourself by weighing yourself down with the shame and judgments of others. You have to detach your identity and self-worth from the opinions of our culture and root them instead within yourself, because that's where you're going to get the strength to persevere, and that's where you're going to find your truth, whatever that truth may be. Don't be afraid of that truth and about seeking it, and don't be ashamed of it. Honor it and demand that others honor it. I hope that this has been helpful, and I'll see you next time.